in terms of what we're doing today, campaigning on the issue of nuclear weapons, this is obviously a really important struggle, and CND is campaigning particularly against US nukes in Britain. So you've been warning since April 2022 that there's growing evidence that the US is intending to use RAF Lakenheath as a major part of NATO's nuclear weapons infrastructure in Europe. And I just wondered if you could talk to the significance of this issue. How much does this move by the US sort of reflect the extent to which the United States is dictating British foreign policy? What are the dangers of it? And importantly, how can we get involved in CND's campaign against this?
I mean, obviously, the US and UK are very, very closely tied together in many, many ways. This so-called special relationship, which British leaders certainly think a lot of, even though it's clear that US leaders don't necessarily think a lot of it. You know, they just... Anyway, but Britain's got a historically very long nuclear agreement with the United States. It was signed in 1958. Its kind of short title is the Mutual Defence Agreement. It's the most far-reaching and extensive nuclear sharing and cooperation agreement that exists in the world today. And it's also thought to underpin that kind of closeness of US and UK foreign policy as well. But the thing to note about this, before I go on to talk about Lakenheath a bit, is that every 10 years, this so-called mutual defence agreement comes up for renewal in both administrations, well, in Congress and in the British Parliament. And this year is the moment when it gets renewed for another 10 years. And we are trying to raise awareness of this. We're trying to work with parliamentary CND, with our very supportive MPs in Parliament, cross-party MPs in Parliament, to actually get a debate tabled on this so it doesn't just go through on the nod. Because what happens is they do this thing called, they put it on the table, whatever that means, you know, it's there. And under the parliamentary rules, things that are treaties that are on the table, they are kind of priority status for getting a debate in Parliament. But people don't necessarily take it up. That's the problem. The problem is getting MPs to really be seized of the issue, you know, and maybe against the wishes of their own leaders in Parliament or whatever, but to really get that raised. So it's not just approaching World War III. We don't just want it going through on the nod that Britain and the US are tied at the hip in terms of nuclear weapons and nuclear policy. So that's one thing that we're trying to do. So people will find in weeks to come, they'll find stuff on the CND website about that and actions that you can take to really be pushing back on the renewal of this so-called mutual defence agreement. So that agreement has basically underpinned the relationship, and one of the relationships, and you know, there are other treaties from those years like the 50s and so on, which essentially allowed the US to run and control military facilities in Britain. And there are a number of, and I'm not even going to talk about the fact that Britain's nuclear weapons system, Trident, which is located up in Faslane and so on in Scotland, that is a kind of bit of a co-production with the United States. I'll leave that to one side because this is a kind of a new thing. So there are various bases which are basically may as well be bits of the United States in Britain. And one of those is RAF Lakenheath in West Suffolk, you know, sort of almost equidistant, say, between Norwich and Cambridge. And that airbase, in our movement, in the peace movement, people actually like to call it USAF Lakenheath, United States Air Force Lakenheath, because, you know, the Brits have basically got no control whatsoever over it. Now, for quite a long time, US nuclear weapons were located in Lakenheath, and they were withdrawn in 2008 as a result of sustained protest there. So CND and our local allies have been working very hard, doing a lot of campaigning there. It's also in the context of the huge anti-war movement at that time following on the Iraq war. So they removed those nuclear weapons. Those nuclear weapons are part of a whole class of nuclear weapons that are located across Western Europe and in Turkey. So these are B-61 bombs. They are so-called gravity bombs or airdrop bombs. So it's not like Trident, where you put a warhead on a missile and you fire the missile thousands of miles intercontinental. These bombs, you put them on a plane, you drive over somewhere and you drop it. Okay, so it's slightly kind of old kit in a way. But nevertheless, these weapons are located in Western Europe primarily. Countries in Western Europe that host them have tried on a number of occasions to get rid of them, passing laws through Parliament and all that kind of thing. But the US has refused to remove them because they say that now, actually, they're NATO bombs, and NATO works by consensus. So in places like Belgium and Germany and so on have done this, tried to get rid of them. But no, because other NATO states want to keep them, sorry, you have to keep them. So there's no sovereignty, national sovereignty allowed in this whatsoever. And in fact, it was most recently in Germany that they tried to get rid of these nuclear weapons. And on this occasion, actually, which sort of gives the lie to the previous position, the Americans said, well, we can take them away, but if we do, we'll put them in Poland, and that'll make the situation even worse, vis-a-vis Russia. So it's clearly nothing to do with a NATO consensus. It's just what the US wants to do. Anyway, so all those are being upgraded. They're now guided bombs, B-61-12s. They're going to be launched from the new F-35s, which are coming to Western Europe, coming to Lakenheath. They're already in Lakenheath. So massive upgrading of this technology. And as part of this, they are going to bring them back, or they are trying to go and bring them back to Lakenheath. So we'll be bristling with nuclear weapons. Bad on a whole range of factors. So putting us on the nuclear front line, of course, that's very bad. Threat to local communities in particular, danger of accidents. You've got a load of nuclear weapons there. I don't need to spell out why that's not great for the people of East Anglia. But yes, this is bad. When challenged in Parliament by parliamentary C&D members, we don't comment on these things. We either confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons and so on. So British parliamentarians have had no prior notice. They're entitled to no explanation or commentary. It's this agreement with the United States basically handing over part of our country to them to do what they want with. That kind of trumps all national sovereignty and the rights of British parliamentarians. So pretty disgraceful, I'm sure everyone will agree. And it has already had a very negative impact in terms of proliferation in Europe, because when this was first kind of made public, there was a well-known researcher, Hans Christensen, just found this out by reading through US Department of Defense documents, which kind of suddenly had appeared money for this at Lakenheath appeared on, so that's how people found out about it and how it became made public. So then the Russian government then said, well, this is a big escalation, the upgrading of the weapons in Europe, bringing nukes back to Britain. This is an escalation. You claim that you can do it for various reasons legally, so we're going to do it in Belarus. If it's okay for you, it's okay for us. So now Russia has put a similar kind of category nuclear weaponry in Belarus. Terrible. So that is the kind of further escalation in this terrible war. So it shows how important it is to take action to prevent them coming to Lakenheath. That's obviously crucial. We work closely with the campaigns at the other bases across Europe. We've had them coming over and joining us at our protests. But it also shows how important it is for peace negotiations to end the war on Ukraine. Absolutely crucial. Terrible suffering caused to the Ukrainian people. The terrible, terrible sights you see in the communities there in Ukraine, and innocent civilians being killed. And also the kind of terrible loss of life in both of those armies, the military deaths in the Ukrainian army, the terrible military deaths in the Russian army. People just want their sons and daughters to come home safe. This is the reality. They don't want people being sent off to kill and be killed in that way. So that war has to end, and there has to be a proper political settlement so that the rights of all minorities are respected and recognised in Ukraine in those contested areas. So, yeah, that's what's absolutely essential. There has to be an end to that war. There has to be an end to the provocation weapons like US nukes coming to Lakenheath that put us all at risk. So I'm pleased to say that there's a lot of campaigning going on there. Recently, we had a peace camp there at Lakenheath, which got a lot of national coverage. So we are actually raising awareness of what is going on. There's going to be another peace camp in the months ahead. We're going to have regular vigils taking place there to raise awareness too. And we feel, there's a very strong trend in the peace movement that feels it's important to actually go to the site of where the crimes will be coming from. The crime is, and will people go out from there with these terrible bombs. So we have to actually go there, raise awareness of the site, and just say, no, we're not accepting it. We're not having this coming back here. So we're also having another national demonstration there in early November too. So if any of you people listening and watching want to get involved, please do go to the CND website, come to Lakenheath, join us there, and find every way you can of opposing that, and also of opposing the war in Ukraine too, making sure we bring that to a speedy, peaceful settlement.